we request everybody to settle down? Welcome back. Now we will move on to the second session, that is discussions. We will have Mr. Gokul KS, Ph.D. scholar, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras, and Ms. Madhura Balasubramaniam, Ph.D. scholar, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. We invite you both to the stage. We're going to start with the presentations. First presentation will be made by Mr. Gokul KS, PhD scholar, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, on the topic Aesthetic Politics of Tibetan Filmmaking in Exile. Over to you.
Thank you. So hello everyone, I am Gokul KS. So I'm a PhD student at IIT Madras. So I've been doing research on Tibetan cinema and filmmaking. Can you hear us?
Louder.
Just keep it closer to your mouth.
Okay, sure. I will talk to you, yeah. So I'm a PhD student at IIT Madras. So I'm working on Tibetan cinema and filmmaking in Exile for the last 3 years. So before getting into the talk, I would like to thank C3S because, being working with the Tibetan filmmaking community or being in contact with them, the one thing which I've learned that they find it very difficult to find spaces to screen their films because it's very difficult for the filmmakers. Most of them are independent documentaries, short films, and some feature films. For the filmmakers, finding these spaces to screen some of their work is very, very difficult. Every now and then, you will come across the stories from these filmmakers who say that, we really want to show these stories because these are not just stories, for them, to the world. But the difficulty is to find the spaces to show this thing. So the significance or the relevance of this screening and the discussion we are going to have, I think I really would like to appreciate C3S for organizing this thing. So yeah, I just wanted to start on that. So now, the topic which I'm supposed to speak today is aesthetic politics, but let's not get into the the theoretical or academic part of that thing. This film, as you're watching the film, you would know that this was shot in 2008 when the protests were happening in Tibet, as well as in response to that there were protests happening outside the Tibet also. But we are watching this film in 2022. It's almost 1.5 decades later we are seeing this film. So what film does to us, like what documentaries, does to people. That's the thing about documentaries, right? When we watch a film, it takes us to a certain place. It actually shows a certain story. So initially we can acknowledge the fact that the moment we are talking, the moment we are watching this film, the moment we are discussing about this film, the struggle which we saw on the screen, the resistance which we saw on the screen is actually ongoing. People in Dharamsala, people in different Tibetan settlements, Tibetans across the world, all of them, they are still part of this struggle or the resistance which we saw on this documentary is very much live. It's still happening, it's still going on. So that's the thing cinema does. It actually documents, because this film was shot in 2008, the filmmakers were traveling with the protesters, they were interviewing these different peoples. When they are doing this thing, they are actually documenting history or documenting the present as it is unfolding. So that's the most interesting aspect about this documentary, because almost 1.5 decades later, when we look back at this documentary, the one thing that immediately that's very apparent is that this is a document. It's a documentary, but it's a document of a specific period. Now so much things have changed. Like if you look at from different angles, if you look at how the Tibetan struggle is going on, or how the policies of the different countries, or different aspects discussed in the documentary, many of these things have changed. So today when you guys have watched this film, when you go back, when you reflect, like every film, like even a normal film we watch in theater, we always process that film, we try to understand like what is this film, like what this narrative tells about the world, or the world which it actually shared with us. So when we, when I am watching, this is the 8th time actually I'm watching this documentary. Like every time I'm watching this documentary, some or other aspect about the Tibetan resistance or Tibetan struggle, it always feels very thought provoking in many sense. So that's the thing about the struggle. When we look back at that particular period, the one thing that that comes very immediately that comes to our mind is how the struggle is part of an everydayness. Like for example, most of us are youngsters, many of our youngsters here. Like just imagine, like every day we've been told that okay, you have to fight for your country, you have to fight for your the struggle, freedom, independence, or maybe different approaches. But you have to daily you are reminded of that fight. And what if you don't have the energy? Or what if you don't feel like fighting? Then imagine, then there is another group within your own community saying that no, you shouldn't behave like this. You are actually supposed to fight. That's a very different situation. I think all of us in the room can only imagine, even sometimes beyond imaginations, because when we travel to Dharamsala, when we talk to people, when we have so much of conversations with the filmmakers, with other people working in other streams, other areas, this thing always comes up. Like, when, see, as outsiders, when we ask them to talk about the struggle, we always consciously or unconsciously expect them to perform their thoughts. Like, if a person like Tenzin Sundu comes here, he always has this expectation that there will be this firebrand speech that's going on. But what if they don't want? These are the aspects that's always, these things came to me. I was actually not supposed to talk about these things, but I was watching this film today. This actually came to my mind. Then if you think about the voice and image in this film, this is something that I've been thinking for some time about Tibetan cinema. Like most of you here, like when was the first time we hear about Tibet? Or the idea the moment somebody used the word Tibet or Tibetans or Tibetan Buddhism, most of our thoughts or perspectives actually sort of influenced, or like sort of wired by the images we know about this monks in the red robes or the Buddhist bells, or like different images. How did we get these images? We don't how many of us naturally think about this struggle when we hear the word Tibet? It's actually very different, because the way we understand or the way we see Tibet, I mean, when I'm talking about we, the people outside the immediate Tibetan community, it's actually influenced by so many films we have seen, or like there's so many references. In popular culture, that has been the case. So for a really long time, if we like, for just a fact to share a fact, there was this film called Lost Horizon. It was made a long time back. It was actually based on James Hilton's novel. In that novel, there is this place called Shangri-La where everything is peaceful, but it's actually very mystical. So the real world is of struggles. So if you want to get some kind of recovery, you will go to this place. So this image, and the Shangri-La was Tibet. And then they made a film on that. So many people actually thought that the image of Tibet for many people is that, okay, this is the last bastion. This is the absolutely last place where, when you have so much struggles, you just go there and settle there. You'll get redemption or like self-discovery and all those things. But these images were actually not initially created by Tibetans or the Tibetan community. This image, or this, what we actually know about Tibet for a really long time, has actually been shaped by non-Tibetans. Then Tibetans, when they started to make films, the initial task was actually to counter these representations. They have to say that, okay, this is not our struggle. Our struggle is what we saw on the screen. So when in 2008 they were making this film, the real struggle was actually to show the world what the Tibetan community and what they are going through. But it's actually not that easy. There is the trickiest part. Because as you have seen in this documentary, there are different views on the struggle itself. Like there are people who say that, independent Tibet is there. but it's actually not a struggle to, when you look at the thing, it's actually not a struggle in that sense, because every community, like, irrespective of geographical regions or cultures, we always have two or three or four or multiple opinions to the same thing. And that's a very organic, natural thing to happen, the same thing. But when we talk about the Tibetan community, within the community itself, there is this context of struggle going on. So when this context of struggle is there, then it becomes a difficult thing. Like, how will you articulate this thing? So one good thing about this documentary, which I personally felt, is that this documentary actually manages to show these different opinions, giving equal or like balanced amount of attention to all these different views. So as students, or like as people, normal people, trying to understand the Tibet situation, this documentary actually covers a lot of the aspects, from the different political opinions, how the community is living, how the protest is happening. All these aspects is covered in this documentary. Now, uh, one of the speakers in this document, like this, the little bit of the context to the incidents happening in the documentary. In 2008, as we know, most of the people in the room, all of us know what happened in 2008. This huge Beijing Olympics was happening. It was all over the news because it was a display of Chinese, power and everything. Before this Olympics, run up to the Olympics, protests started to erupt in Tibet. So in Tibet, historically, Tibet is actually divided into these three regions called Kham, Amdo, and Usang, which is Central Tibet and Eastern Tibet, two regions in Eastern Tibet. So protests happened across all these regions. Like, there were small footages in the documentary which actually showed like people protesting. Now it's not like protests happening inside Chinese occupied Tibet or also in China. It's actually not like protests happening in other democratic countries, because in China, whatever, we know that protest has a very different language. The language of protest in China is very different from how it is elsewhere. So these protests actually